The best beginner camera for photography, in my opinion, is this camera. It's a Canon 5D Mark III. So, my name is Michael and I'm a photographer and filmmaker from Sweden, and today I'm going to talk about this camera. It's actually my camera. I bought it 5 or 6 years ago and I used it up until just a couple months ago, and even though this camera is old and probably came out perhaps 10 years ago, I still think this is a good camera and it's definitely worth the money. So when the Canon 5D came out, it was kind of like a revolutionary for the DSLR camera, and it was like a new shift in filmmaking. It was the first time that you could start actually doing video with these DSLR cameras. Before, it was only made for photography. And this opened up to a lot of new possibilities, because all of a sudden you can get a good camera for around $2,000, a good video camera. Before that, it was not possible, I would say. So when this hype started around 2010, I actually bought the Canon EOS 550D, and that was like the cheaper version of this one. This was the camera that pretty much everyone wanted, and at that time it was too expensive for me. It cost around $3,000, and I kind of dreamt about that camera, but since I was a beginner filmmaker, I didn't have the money to buy it. But moving forward, maybe 5-6 years, when this one came out, the third generation, the Mark III. And I've been advancing a bit in my filmmaking career and mainly focusing on filmmaking and video, and not so much about photography. But the more work I landed, which was inside filmmaking, I also got requests of doing photography work at the same time. So I started to realize that I need a good still camera. And at that time I was using my Red camera for video, and all the lenses was in EF. So I thought, I'm gonna buy a camera that I can use the same lenses with, and I'm not looking to buy the newest, the best and the most expensive camera. So I thought this camera could be good, and I bought it secondhand for around $1,200, I think. And since I was not doing that much photography work, I think this camera was good enough for me. And yeah, I'm gonna show some photos and let the camera and my work speak for itself. Okay, so let's jump into some specs on this camera. And I'm gonna make it short because I don't know anything about the specs actually, and I don't really care that much about it. All I know is that this camera is good enough to do client work, shoot stuff that's gonna end up on social media. And I even used this camera where I shot like background photo that was used in one of the biggest TV shows in Sweden. It's called... Yes, the show was called Best I Test here in Sweden, and it's called Taskmaster in England. And that photo was, I think, around 3 meters high and 9 meters long. And I shot it with this camera and it was not a problem. And since all the specs and the quality is good enough, and the price you can buy this camera for, I think it's a pretty damn good beginner camera. Because it's not super expensive and it's not brand new, and I think the first camera you should buy, you should see it as a tool and something that you can just use very, very much. And don't see it as an investment that you're buying a camera, maybe you set it in 3-5 years. I would rather see it that you buy it and then you're gonna use it so much that someday it's gonna break down and you don't care about it, and then you just buy a new one. And that's pretty much how I see with all my cameras. Even though I've been in this game for quite long, I rarely sell any cameras. I just buy a lot of cameras. I buy secondhand also, and I'm using them until they're gonna break down. So some cameras I've probably had for like over 10 years. I've had this one for 5 years. I don't see any point in selling it. And yeah, maybe I will use it more in the future, maybe not, we'll see. But yeah, I'd rather just use it until it dies. And also going back to another parallel, when I was a kid, you could see, I was playing ice hockey and you could see some of the professional players, and sometimes you were a bit surprised that they didn't have the newest and the most expensive gears and so on, and you didn't really understand because they had lots of money and they could buy and get whatever they want. But when you get older, you also kind of realize that they are using the stuff that they are comfortable with and not the most expensive things. So if they had a stick and they used that for 10 years, they don't see a point in buying a new one. And I also think that's a good way of seeing it in the filmmaking and photography business. A lot of people are focusing too much on the gear. Of course, you need good gears, but at some point you need to buy the gear and you need to stop and then just focusing on creating and just doing as much as you can with those cameras and equipment you have. And I think this camera, for the price, and since this is not brand new, it's not gonna excite you too much. So I don't think it's gonna stop your creativity, and it will lead you to focusing on taking photos and create more work. So yeah, that's my thoughts about this camera. If you want to use it for video, you can. I have used it as a second camera in quite a lot of productions actually. I'm trying to not use it anymore. I don't think the video quality is super great to the cameras that you have nowadays, and I also have better cameras for it. But I mean, I could still use this for photography. I think even today in 2023, I think it's a good camera, and it very much depends on how you are as a photographer and not what this camera can achieve. So that's my thoughts on this. Buy a cheap camera and shoot lots of photos instead of buying a expensive camera and use it not that much. The only thing that matters if you want to be a good photographer is that you take 100 and 1,000 and 10,000 and 100,000 of photos, because that's when you're gonna get better. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to talk more about cameras and filmmaking and photography on this channel. So I will see you in another video, and goodbye.